Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku actually does have a quirk. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world, for Izuku Midoriya, had always been a noisy place. Not just in the conventional sense, the rumble of trains on the overpass, the cacophony of chatter from 1,000 different lives intersecting on the crowded sidewalks of Mizutafu, the distant wail of a siren that was as much a part of the city's heartbeat as the pigeons in the park. For Izuku, there was another layer, a subtle, ever-present stratum of sensation that he had long ago dismissed as an overactive imagination. He called it the hum. It was a constant, low-level thrum that lay beneath the surface of reality, a background static that shifted and changed with his environment. A bakery didn't just smell of sugar and yeast, it felt warm and soft, a gentle, rising pressure against his senses. A construction site wasn't just loud with machinery, it felt sharp and percussive, like tiny needles dancing on his skin. Heroes were the most potent sources. The popular hero who could stretch his limbs like taffy had a feeling like old wood groaning and stretching. The rookie heroine with a gigantification quirk felt like a sudden, immense gravitational pull, a density that made the very air seem to press down. He never told anyone about it. How could he? Hi, I'm Izuku Midoriya, I'm quirkless, but sometimes I think I can feel the shape of other people's quirks. They would have sent him to a different kind of doctor, one who dealt with delusions. The word quirkless had been a brand seared into his soul at the age of 4, a definitive, clinical judgment that had shaped every day of his life since. That single, extra joint in his pinky toe was the biological proof. He had no power, so this hum had to be a coping mechanism, a fantasy his nerdy, hero-obsessed brain had concocted to make a gray world a little more colorful. Today, however, the world was silent. The hum had receded to an almost imperceptible whisper. All the color had been leached out, replaced by a flat, monochrome despair. It's not bad to dream. But you have to be realistic, kid. The words echoed in his head, far louder than any phantom sensation. All Might. His hero, the symbol of peace, had told him in no uncertain terms. Be realistic. He hadn't even been in his grand, muscular form, just a skeletal man, shrouded in steam, speaking a truth so harsh it felt like a physical blow. Izuku's feet scuffed along the pavement, his shoulders slumped in a posture of utter defeat. His burned and waterlogged notebook, Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13, felt like a 10-ton weight in his hands. The autograph on the front, a bold, confident scrawl from his idol, felt like a cruel joke. A signature on a book of impossible dreams. He trudged towards the underpass, the usual route home, his mind a maelstrom of self-recrimination. Quirkless. Useless. Deku. Kaken's voice, his mother's tearful apology, the doctor's detached diagnosis. They all swirled together, a chorus of failure. He was so lost in his own misery that he didn't notice the strange shift in the underpass ahead. The usual hum of the city, a complex tapestry of distant cars, people's latent quirk factors, the electrical grid, was being muffled. It was like a thick blanket was being lowered over the world. A sickeningly cold, damp spot was growing in the air, a sensory void that swallowed all other feelings. It felt slimy. Like old, stagnant pond water. Izuku lifted his head, his eyes struggling to adjust to the dim light of the tunnel. And then he saw it. A gurgling, shifting mountain of green sludge was pouring out of a manhole cover. Two bulbous, cartoonish eyes swam in the morass, swiveling erratically before they locked onto him. A wide, jagged mouth stretched across the fluid body. A medium-sized invisibility cloak. The creature gurgled, its voice like mud bubbling. Before Izuku could even process the words, a wave of sludge shot forward. His mind screamed run, but his feet were frozen, cemented to the spot by a decade of being a bystander, a victim. The sensation hit him a split second before the sludge did. It was a thick, suffocating, muddy feeling that didn't just surround him, but sought to invade him. It was the antithesis of life. It was rot and decay and drowning, all coalesced into a tangible sensory pressure. Then it was on him. Cold, viscous fluid filled his mouth and nose. It poured down his throat, a living current of filth. His lungs burned for air he couldn't get. The world dissolved into a panicked, green-tinged blur. The monster's quirk was a physical and sensory assault. He could feel its malevolent presence trying to merge with him, a cloying, invasive hum that was trying to override his own. It was a feeling of utter violation. His frantic scrabbling was useless. His limbs, submerged in the sludge, felt disconnected from his brain. Is this it? Is this how I die? He thought, his vision starting to speckle with black. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. Suddenly, a thunderous clang echoed from the manhole cover as it was sent flying. Have no fear, you are safe! A booming voice declared, a voice Izuku knew better than his own. Now that I am here, that is, All Might. The sensory shift was instantaneous and violent. The suffocating, muddy presence of the sludge villain was blasted away by a feeling so immense, so powerful, it was like a sun erupting in the cramped underpass. It was a blazing, golden, indomitable sensation. A clear, powerful trumpet blast that cut through the villain's oppressive hum and filled every inch of Izuku's being with warmth and hope. Texas smash! A hurricane of wind pressure tore through the tunnel. The sludge villain was atomized, ripped from Izuku's body in 1,000 tiny droplets. Izuku was thrown back, collapsing onto the concrete, gasping, coughing, and greedily sucking in air that now tasted of ozone and pure, unadulterated heroism. The very air around All Might felt charged, a palpable aura of safety and power that scrubbed the villain's slimy residue from the world. Izuku's head swam as All Might, in his magnificent glory, moved with impossible speed, gathering the splattered remains of the villain into 2 large soda bottles. He was fumbling, trying to get his notebook, trying to say something, anything. Thank you so much! It was amazing! Can you please— Oh, you already signed it! Thank you. This will be a family heirloom, he babbled, bowing repeatedly. All Might gave him a hearty laugh and a thumbs up. Glad to be of service. Now I must get this fellow to the authorities. Stay safe, citizen. With a mighty crouch, All Might prepared to leap away. Panic seized Izuku. He had to know. He couldn't let this be the end of it. Acting on pure, desperate instinct, he lunged forward and latched onto the hero's leg just as he took off. The flight was terrifying. The wind whipped at his face, threatening to peel him from his precarious hold. All Might, surprised, struggled to find a safe place to land. They came down on a nearby rooftop with a jarring thud. It was there that the world fell apart for the second time that day. It was there that All Might, after scolding him for the reckless stunt, suddenly deflated like a burst balloon. A cloud of steam erupted, and in the place of the mountain of muscle stood the emaciated man from before. Izuku stared, his mind refusing to process what his eyes, and his senses, were telling him. The brilliant, sun-like feeling of All Might's presence had collapsed inward. It was still there, but it was now a flickering, banked ember. He could feel the wound All Might revealed, a gruesome, starburst-shaped scar on his side. It felt like a hole in the hero's very being, a place where the golden hum of his power guttered and frayed. It felt like pain. All Might told him everything. The devastating fight, the irreparable injuries, the time limit on his power. He spoke of a world that needed a symbol of peace, and his own failing ability to be that symbol. As he spoke of the villain who did this to him, a villain whose name he wouldn't say, Izuku felt a phantom sensation, a cold, hungry void, a feeling of pure taking, a discordance so profound it made the sludge villain's presence feel simple by comparison. Then came Izuku's question, the one he had clutched in his heart his entire life, the last flickering ember of his own hope. Even without a quirk, can I be a hero? All Might looked down at the rooftop, his expression grim. The silence stretched for an eternity. Without a quirk, he began, his voice heavy. Pros are always laying their lives on the line. Some villains can't be beaten without raw power. So no, I honestly don't think you can become a hero without a quirk. The ember of hope inside Izuku was extinguished. Doused with ice water. Stamped into dust. The world went utterly, completely silent. The hum he had lived with his entire life vanished. The distant feeling of the city, the faint energy of the people below, even the wounded flicker of All Might's own power, it all faded to nothing. There was only the rush of the wind and the crushing, absolute finality of his hero's words. He had been a fool. A delusional, Pathetic fool. All Might turned to leave. It's not bad to dream. Just make sure your dreams are attainable. Realistic. Izuku could only stare at the rooftop access door, his dreams crumbling around him. The soda bottles containing the sludge villain were gone from All Might's pocket. In his distraction, he must have dropped them during the flight. The thought barely registered before a distant explosion rocked the city. Izuku arrived at the scene in a daze. It was a shopping district he knew well. Smoke billowed into the sky. A crowd was already gathered, held back by police lines. Pro-heroes were on the scene, but they were struggling, and Izuku could feel why. The slimy, suffocating, muddy hum of the sludge villain was back, stronger than before. It felt angrier, more chaotic. But it wasn't alone. Woven into it, fighting against it, was another sensation, one Izuku knew as well as his own name. It was a sharp, crackling, popping feeling. A staccato barrage of heat and noise that felt like a firecracker held too close to the ear. It was the feeling of nitroglycerin sweat. It was Katsuki Bakugo. His childhood friend, his tormentor, was the new host. He was trapped, engulfed by the same monster that had nearly killed Izuku less than an hour ago. Bakugo was fighting back, unleashing explosion after explosion from within the sludge. But it was only making the situation worse, setting fire to the surrounding buildings. The pro-heroes were at a standstill. Kamui Woods, whose quirk felt like growing, creaking wood, was helpless against the fires. Empty Lady, whose presence was a heavy, ground-shaking thrum, couldn't fit into the narrow alleyway. Backdraft was doing his best to contain the flames, his quirk a cool, rushing presence against the heat, but he couldn't get near the villain. Izuku pushed through the crowd, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He saw the desperation in Bakugo's eyes. He saw the fear. This was his fault. If he hadn't clung to All Might's leg, the villain would be in custody. This was all his fault. He looked at the heroes, then at the monster. His analytical mind, the one thing he'd always taken pride in, kicked into overdrive. But this time, it wasn't just his eyes taking in the information. It was his other, secret sense. He could see the villain's solid parts. The eyes, the teeth, were its weak points. That was simple observation. But he could feel something else. He could feel the chaotic, explosive hum of Kaken's quirk straining against the muddy, containing hum of the villain. The villain was a fluid, but it wasn't infinite. It was struggling to hold Kaken. Every time Bakugo unleashed a powerful blast, Izuku could feel the villain's own sensory presence thin out, waver for a fraction of a second, its focus stretched to its limit. There was an opening. Not a physical one his eyes could see, but a momentary weakness he could feel. A flicker. A skip in the monster's oppressive rhythm. He didn't know why he moved. His legs just went. He burst through the police line, a scrawny, quirkless kid with a yellow backpack, sprinting towards a battle that had stopped seasoned pros in their tracks. You! Stop, you idiot! Death Arms shouted. He couldn't stop. He was useless. He was quirkless. But his friend was dying. As he ran, he unslung his backpack. It was a desperate, insane plan, born from 1,000 hypothetical fight scenarios he'd scribbled in his notebooks. He knew Kaken's pride. He knew his friend would never let a villain use his quirk for him. He was fighting. Izuku just had to give him a chance. He drew his arm back and hurled the backpack with all his might. It sailed through the air and struck the villain squarely in the eye. The monster roared in pain and surprise, its grip loosening for a precious second. Kaken! Izuku screamed, clawing frantically at the sludge. Deku? What the hell are you doing here? Bakugo choked out, his face momentarily free. I don't know. My legs just started moving. Izuku cried, tears streaming down his face. I couldn't just stand there and watch you die. For a fleeting moment, the arrogance in Bakugo's eyes was replaced with something else. Shock. Fear. Confusion. The sludge monster recovered, lurching forward to engulf them both. You're done, you little pest! But the brief distraction had been enough. I really am pathetic, a familiar voice said from behind them. Izuku turned to see All Might, no longer gaunt and skeletal, but in his magnificent muscle form, standing tall despite the steam pouring off him. He'd pushed past his limit. I told you the traits that make a great hero, All Might said, wiping blood from his mouth. But I see I wasn't living up to my own ideals. Pros are always risking their lives. That's the true test of a hero. With a mighty roar, he grabbed both Izuku and Bakugo, pulling them free. Detroit. Smash! The punch was a cataclysm. The world turned to wind and sound. The sensory feeling of All Might's power was no longer a steady sun. It was a supernova. A concussive wave of pure heroic intent that didn't just scatter the sludge villain, but vaporized its foul, muddy presence from existence. The shockwave was so powerful it changed the weather, and a sudden downpour began to fall on the smoldering street. In the aftermath, Izuku was scolded by the pros for his recklessness, while Bakugo was praised for his powerful quirk and bravery. It was the story of his life. He walked away, numb and empty, the brief flash of adrenaline fading back into the gray despair that had defined his day. He didn't get far before he was interrupted by two voices. Deku! It was Bakugo, running to catch up, his face a mask of fury and confusion. I never asked you to save me. I didn't need your help. You didn't do anything, you got it? I had it handled. You damn quirkless nerd, don't you look down on me. He spun around and stalked off, his pride clearly wounded more than anything else. Then, the second voice. I am here! All Might boomed, skidding to a halt in front of Izuku. Izuku could only stare. The hero should have been gone. His time limit was up. Young man. All Might began, before deflating back into his skeletal form with a great hiss of steam. He coughed, a fleck of blood on his chin. I came to thank you, and to revise what I said earlier. Izuku's heart, which he thought had run out of ability to feel, gave a painful lurch. I also have a correction to make. All Might continued. When you ran into that fight, I was spurred to act. There are stories about every hero. Most of them have one thing in common. Their bodies moved before they had a chance to think. Izuku looked down, tears welling in his eyes again. That's what happened to you, wasn't it? He could only nod, choking back a sob. All Might's face broke into a gentle, tired smile. Young man, you, too, can become a hero. The world, which had been so silent and gray, exploded back into color. The hum returned, not as a background noise, but as a swelling chorus. Izuku fell to his knees, the dam of his emotions breaking completely. Through his tears he saw his idol, his hero, the number one, standing before him, offering him a gift he couldn't comprehend. I have deemed you worthy of my power, All Might said, his voice ringing with a solemnity that shook Izuku to his core. My quirk is yours to inherit. Izuku looked up, his mind reeling. Inherit a quirk? What did that even mean? My quirk was passed on to me like a sacred torch. All Might explained, holding out a hand as if holding that flame. It is the crystallization of power, passed from user to user, growing stronger with each generation. It is called One for All, One for All. The name itself felt powerful. Izuku tried to process it. A transferable quirk. A power that could be given. It defied everything he knew. But why me? Izuku whispered. What makes me worthy? Your spirit! All Might declared. You, a quirkless, frightened boy, were more heroic than anyone else on that scene today. You moved to save a life, with no thought for your own. That is the essence of a hero. The weight of the offer, the sheer, impossible reality of it, was crushing. His dream wasn't just attainable. It was being handed to him by the one person who embodied it. But Izuku struggled for words. I'm not sure. All Might seemed to understand his hesitation. The hero was asking him to accept a power, a legacy, he felt he had no right to. He needed to show him. I know this is a lot to take in, All Might said, his voice softening. It's one thing to talk about power. It's another to see it. Let me show you what you would be inheriting. Feel the true nature of One for All. All Might closed his eyes for a moment. He took a deep breath, and the change began. The wounded, flickering ember of his presence that Izuku had become accustomed to began to glow. It swelled, growing hotter and brighter. Steam began to pour from his body as muscle and sinew wove themselves back into existence. Patching over the skeletal frame, he grew, expanding back into the symbol of peace. And as he did, the sensory output became a torrent. It was no longer just a feeling of warmth, or a sound like a trumpet. It was everything, all at once. It was a symphony, a deafening, roaring symphony of power that slammed into Izuku's senses with the force of a physical blow. He staggered back, his hands flying up to his head as if to block it out. It was 1,000 instruments playing a million different notes, yet somehow all in perfect, glorious harmony. It was a blinding light that seemed to burn behind his eyes, a spectrum of colors he had never seen before. It was the taste of lightning and ozone on his tongue, the feeling of the earth's rotation under his feet, the immense, crushing weight of generations of hope and sacrifice. He could feel the history within it. He felt an unyielding, fortress-like strength, a sensation of gentle, weightless flight, a feeling like black, binding whips of energy, a sense of kinetic danger building to a breaking point. It was a choir of echoes, the ghosts of past users all singing their part in the grand composition of One for All. And at the forefront, the lead vocalist, was All Might's own heroic spirit, a golden crescendo that held it all together. It was the most terrifying, most beautiful thing he had ever experienced. It was too much. The sheer magnitude of the sensory input was overwhelming, threatening to shatter his mind. And then, in the heart of that raging storm, something impossible happened. Deep inside him, in the quiet, empty place where a quirk should have been, something flickered. It was a tiny, faint sensation, almost entirely lost in the tidal wave of power pouring from All Might. It was a ping, a single, lonely tuning fork in a soundproofed room, suddenly vibrating in resonance with the orchestra raging outside. A gentle, internal hum that harmonized with one single note in All Might's symphony. For the first time in his life, Izuku felt something inside himself respond. It wasn't his. It couldn't be. He was quirkless. The doctor had said so. The X-ray proved it, but the feeling was undeniable. A nascent spark, long dormant, now stirring in the presence of this immense power. And in that moment of impossible resonance, everything clicked into place. The hum. The weird feelings. The way he could just know things about a fight. His analysis, his one point of pride, his only skill, it hadn't just been observation. It hadn't been an overactive imagination, it was a sense. A weak, passive, useless sense, but a sense nonetheless. It had been there all along, whispering to him from the background, and he had been too convinced of his own worthlessness to ever listen. The doctor had been looking for a power, a physical manifestation. He never thought to look for a whisper. He was not quirkless. His entire life, his entire identity of suffering, was built on a lie. A misdiagnosis. The symphony from All Might began to recede as the hero powered down slightly, seeing the profound, shell-shocked look on the boy's face. He expected tears, or disbelief about One for All. He did not expect this. Izuku slowly lowered his hands from his head. The tears streaming down his face were not of joy for the future offered, or of sorrow for the past. They were tears of pure, paradigm-shattering shock. He looked up at the towering form of his hero, his green eyes wider than they had ever been, seeing the world, and himself, in a completely new light. The words tumbled from his lips, quiet and stammering, yet they were the loudest, most important words he had ever spoken. All Might, wait! His voice was hoarse, choked with a revelation that was rewriting 15 years of his existence in a single, earth-shattering moment. I think I might have a quirk after all. The world, which had just exploded into a symphony, now contracted to a single, sharp point of focus, the stunned face of All Might. The symbol of peace, a man who had faced down world-ending threats without flinching, was rendered utterly speechless. His jaw, still framed by the powerful lines of his hero form, hung slightly agape. The steam hissing from his body seemed to pause, as if holding its breath. A quirk? All Might finally managed, his booming voice softened to a note of profound confusion. Young man, you said yourself, the doctor's diagnosis. I know what I said. Izuku's words tumbled out, a frantic cascade of revelation and 15 years of repressed sensation. He was on his feet now, gesturing wildly, his mind racing to connect a lifetime of disparate feelings into a single, coherent theory. The hum. It's always been there, I thought it was just my imagination. When Kamui Woods uses his quirk, it feels like stretching, groaning wood. When empty lady grows, it feels like the gravity gets heavier. The sludge villain, he felt like suffocating mud, a cold, slimy pressure. And you, Izuku's wild eyes met All Might's. You're a sun! A blazing, golden sun. And when you powered up just now, it was so loud. So bright. It was a storm, and for the first time, I felt something inside me answer. It was just a tiny flicker, like a string on a guitar vibrating when you play the same note on a piano. It was so quiet. But it was there. I felt it. He was rambling. He knew he was. He probably sounded insane. But the conviction in his own heart was absolute. This was real. All Might slowly, deliberately, deflated. The steam rolled off him, and the towering hero was replaced by the gaunt, skeletal Tashinori Yagi. The sudden absence of that overwhelming sensory presence was like a physical weight being lifted. Tashinori looked at Izuku, not with pity or disbelief, but with an intense, analytical gaze. He, more than anyone, knew that the world was full of secrets and powers that defied simple explanation. A responsive, sensory-type quirk, Tashinori mused, his voice a low rasp. He placed a bony hand on his chin, his brow furrowed in thought. One that reacts to the output of other quirks. If it's purely passive, with no physical manifestation, it's plausible it could be missed. Especially if it only responds strongly to high-energy outputs. He looked at Izuku with newfound seriousness. We need a proper diagnosis. From someone I trust. Someone who knows my secret and understands the complexities of quirks better than anyone. He pulled out a phone, his fingers flying across the screen. Come on, young Midoriya. We're taking a trip. The trip was a blur. Izuku found himself in a taxi with Tashinori, the windows tinted for privacy. The man had made a call, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Izuku could only sit in stunned silence, his world tilted on its axis. Every rattle of the car, every flicker of a neon sign, every distant siren felt different now. He was no longer just observing them, he was sensing them, and he was aware of the sensing. The low-level hum of the city was no longer an imagined background noise. It was the sound of his own power. A power he never knew he had. They didn't go to a hospital. They went to a place that made Izuku's hero-loving heart nearly stop in his chest. The front gates of UA High School. Tashinori showed a staff ID to the security gate, and the massive walls parted to admit them. They walked through the hallowed, empty halls of the most prestigious hero academy in the world. It was late, the setting sun cast long shadows down the corridors, and the building was quiet. But to Izuku, it wasn't silent. The very walls seemed to thrum with a latent energy, the echoes of thousands of powerful quirks being used day after day. It was like standing in a concert hall long after the orchestra had gone home. The air itself still seemed to vibrate with phantom music. Their destination was the nurse's office. It was a clean, white, sterile-looking room, but far more advanced than any school nurse's office Izuku had ever seen. Waiting for them was a diminutive old woman in a lab coat, her gray hair pulled into a tight bun, a massive syringe-like cane resting against her desk. Recovery girl. The youthful heroine, Chio Shizenji. Tashinori, she said, her voice sharp and brooking no nonsense. She adjusted her visor-like glasses and peered at Izuku. You call me in after hours with all the urgency of a national crisis, and you bring me, a scrawny, tear-stained child? Is he injured? He is not, Chio, Tashinori said respectfully. This is young Izuku Midoriya. And he may be the most unique case you've ever seen. Izuku bowed so low his forehead nearly touched his knees. It's an honor to meet you, ma'am. I'm a huge fan of your work and your legacy in humanitarian heroics is unparalleled. Yes, all right, boy, straighten up before you strain something. Recovery girl interrupted, though her expression softened fractionally. She gestured to an examination bed. Hop up. Tashinori, explain, and it had better be good. As Izuku sat on the crinkly paper of the bed, Tashinori recounted the day's events. The sludge villain, the rooftop conversation, Izuku's desperate act of heroism, and the final, shocking revelation. Recovery girl listened, her expression shifting from impatience to skepticism, and finally to intrigue. She took Izuku's vitals, drew a small sample of blood, and ran a scanner over his body that hummed with a low, clinical energy. Well, the boy's files aren't wrong, she announced after a few minutes, looking at a monitor. Standard quirk factor tests are negative. His blood work shows nothing anomalous. Physically, he's as quirkless as they come. Even has the extra joint in his pinky toe. According to every piece of medical science we have, he's a blank. Izuku's heart sank. For a terrifying moment, he thought he'd been wrong after all. Maybe the symphony, the tuning fork, maybe it was all in his head, a hallucination brought on by a day of trauma and emotional whiplash. But, Recovery Girl continued, swiveling in her chair to face them. You're not talking about a physical quirk, are you, Tashinori? You're talking about something psychic. Sensory. She looked at Izuku. Boy, describe it. What did you feel from me when you walked in? Izuku blinked, caught off guard. He focused. What had he felt? It was subtle, far more so than the combat quirks he'd encountered. It's warm, he said slowly, trying to find the words. Like a freshly washed blanket. It's a very gentle, soothing feeling. A feeling of mending. Like tiny, careful stitches pulling things back together. Recovery Girl's eyebrows shot up. She exchanged a look with Tashinori. Interesting, she murmured. She turned back to a different, more complex-looking machine by the bed. It was a helmet with a dizzying array of wires and sensors attached. This is an experimental deep brain scanner. We use it for monitoring neurological activity during complex quirk usage. It's probably overkill, but let's see what's happening in that head of yours. She fitted the cool, heavy helmet over Izuku's hair, attaching a few extra sensors to his temples. A screen flickered to life, showing a complex 3D model of a brain, gently pulsing with low-level activity. All right, boy. Your brain activity is normal, Recovery Girl said, her eyes glued to the screen. Now, Tashinori. Do it. Tashinori nodded grimly. He stood a few feet away from the bed and took a deep breath. Here we go. The transformation began. Steam hissed, muscles swelled, and the gaunt man was consumed by the golden light of the symbol of peace. All Might stood tall, his signature smile fixed on his face, though his eyes were locked on the monitor over Izuku's head. The effect on Izuku was immediate. The symphony of One for All crashed over him again. It was a physical force of sensation, a tidal wave of sound and light, and feeling that made the room itself seem to shake. He gasped, his hands gripping the side of the bed, his knuckles white. The choir of echoes, the history of the quirk, the sheer, indomitable presence of All Might, it filled his senses to the bursting point. And deep inside him, the tiny tuning fork began to vibrate, not just a gentle hum this time, but a clear, ringing tone that resonated in perfect harmony with the power before him. My word! Recovery Girl breathed. Izuku tore his eyes away from All Might and looked at the screen. A section of the brain scan, a part that had been dark and dormant just moments before, was now lit up like a supernova. A complex network of neurons in his parietal and temporal lobes, areas associated with sensory processing and perception, was firing with an intensity she had never witnessed before. It wasn't a standard motor function quirk activation. It was as if an entirely new sense organ, one located purely within his brain, had just been switched on. It's a direct neurological response to your quirk's energy signature, Recovery Girl explained, her voice filled with scientific awe. His brain isn't just seeing you or hearing you, it's perceiving the fundamental nature of your power on a synaptic level. It's like he can hear a sound that exists on a frequency no one else can. All Might deflated, the symphony receding, and the light on the brain scan dimmed back to a resting state. Izuku was left breathing heavily, the phantom sensations still echoing in his mind. Recovery Girl took off the helmet, her touch surprisingly gentle. She looked at Izuku with a completely new expression, one of respect and wonder. Well, young Midoriya, she said, a slow smile spreading across her face. It seems you've been carrying around the quietest sound in the world. It's not psychic, not exactly. It's a sensory quirk, a rare and incredibly subtle form of empathic synesthesia tied directly to quirk factors. It allows you to perceive the residue, or echo of a quirk's usage. Let's call it quirk echo. Quirk echo. It had a name. It was real. A single, hot tear traced a path down Izuku's cheek. He wasn't broken. He wasn't a blank. He had a quirk. The taxi ride back was even quieter than the first, but the silence was different. It was no longer the silence of shock, but of profound, earth-shaking contemplation. Izuku stared out the window at the passing city lights. But he wasn't really seeing them. He was seeing his entire life through a new lens. Every time he'd correctly predicted a hero's move on TV. Every time he'd instinctively known which way to dodge one of Kaken's attacks. Every detailed note in his journals about the feel of a hero's power. It hadn't been just analysis. It had been data, gathered by a sense he never knew he possessed. He was sitting in the back of the taxi next to Toshinori when the full weight of it finally crashed down on him. And it wasn't the joyous epiphany he might have expected. It was a deep, unsettling wave of confusion that left him feeling hollow. All this time, he whispered, his voice cracking. Toshinori looked at him, his expression gentle. It's a lot to process, I know. My notebooks, Izuku said, his gaze distant. My analysis. I thought that was the one thing I had. The one thing that was mine. I couldn't be a hero, so I studied them. I worked so hard to understand them. It was the only thing that made me feel like I wasn't useless. He turned to his mentor, his eyes swimming with a fresh wave of tears, but these were not tears of joy. They were tears of doubt. Was any of it me, All Might? Or was it just my quirk doing all the work? Am I still just a Deku who got lucky with a hidden power? The question hung in the small space of the cab, heavy and sharp. It was the cry of a boy whose entire identity had been built on a foundation of struggle, only to discover that foundation was made of something else entirely. He felt like a fraud. An imposter in his own life story. Toshinori was silent for a long moment, letting the question sit, giving it the weight it deserved. He didn't offer a platitude or a quick dismissal. He understood the crisis Izuku was facing. Let me ask you something, young Midoriya, he said finally, his voice soft but firm. Does a telescope make a man an astronomer? Does a finely crafted pen make a woman a poet? No. They are tools, incredible tools, to be sure, but useless without the will, the passion, and the intellect to wield them. He leaned forward, his gaze locking with Izuku's. Your quirk, this quirk echo, is a tool. It gave you raw data, sensations that no one else could perceive, but it was you, Izuku Midoriya, who chose to pay attention. It was you who spent countless hours cataloging, analyzing, and trying to understand that data. It was you who filled 13 notebooks with some of the most insightful hero analysis I have ever seen. The quirk was the lens. You were the brilliant mind looking through it. Do not you dare belittle your own hard work now. The words struck Izuku with the force of a physical blow, but this one didn't break him. It started to put him back together. A tool, a lens. He looked down at his own hands. They were the hands of a boy who had spent more time holding a pen than anything else. He hadn't been a fraud. He had been a scientist who never knew about his own personal microscope. The work, the dedication, the passion, that had still been his. I see, he whispered, a fragile sense of his old self beginning to return. Good, Toshinori said, leaning back. Because this changes things. Not my offer. It reinforces it. Strengthens it beyond anything I could have imagined. Izuku looked up, confused. What do you mean? One for all is not a simple quirk, Toshinori said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. My master, the one who passed it to me, she told me its true nature. It's more than just a stockpiling strength quirk. It is a vessel. Within it are the quirks of all the previous users, locked away dormant. It's a core of immense power, with the echoes of those who came before fused to it. Izuku's eyes went wide. He thought back to the symphony. The other melodies he'd heard beneath All Might's golden crescendo. The feeling of flight, of binding whips, those were other quirks. I can't feel them, Toshinori confessed, a note of old frustration in his voice. For me, one for all has only ever been the overwhelming physical power. I can't hear the other notes in the song. I am, in a way, tone deaf to its true potential. He turned his full attention to Izuku, his gaze burning with an intensity that made the boy's breath catch in his throat. But you, young Midoriya, you can hear the music. Your quirk echo, it doesn't just sense quirks on the outside. We saw it respond to the core of One for All. It's the key. The perfect companion to my power. A quirk that can intuitively understand other quirks is the ideal vessel for a power that is made of other quirks. The scale of what All Might was saying began to dawn on Izuku. He wasn't just being asked to carry a torch. He was being asked to be the one who could finally read the map that was written in its flame. Before All Might concluded, his voice ringing with absolute conviction. I thought you were a worthy successor because of your heroic heart. Now I know you are the perfect successor, because of your heart, your mind, and your incredible, unique quirk. The world needs a new symbol of peace, Izuku Midoriya, and I believe you are the only one who can not only carry that title, but unlock its true, full meaning. They had arrived at Izuku's apartment complex. The taxi slowed to a stop. For a moment, either of them moved. The offer hung in the air, heavier and more profound than before. It was no longer just a gift, it was a destiny, tailor-made for him. His identity crisis hadn't vanished. The confusion and the feeling of loss were still there, shadows in the corners of his mind. His world was still upside down, but now, amidst the wreckage of his old self, a new path was being illuminated. A path that only he could walk. He was still afraid. He was still the same boy who had been told he was useless his entire life. But for the first time, he had concrete proof that it wasn't true. He had a power. He had a purpose. He had a mentor who believed in him. He looked at Toshinori, at the #1 hero, his idol, who was putting the future of the world in his hands. His fear was overshadowed by a new, shaky, but determined resolve. He took a deep breath, the city's hum a familiar comfort now, a part of himself. Yes, Izuku said. His voice didn't tremble. It wasn't the tearful, overwhelmed acceptance of a boy being given an impossible dream. It was the quiet, firm answer of a young man accepting a great and terrible responsibility. Yes, All Might. I'll do it. The dawn, Izuku decided, had a sound. It was a thin, high-frequency hum, the pale yellow of new light translated into a feeling of clean, quiet potential. It was a stark contrast to the sound of the place he now stood. Dagoba Municipal Beach Park was a cacophony, a jumbled, discordant mess of sensory information. Years of illegal dumping had turned it into a graveyard of forgotten things, and each object carried the faint, lingering echo of its past. Rusting refrigerators buzzed with the cold, electric memory of their former function. Discarded tires held a low, rubbery thrum of motion. Piles of broken electronics created a field of sharp, crackling static that pricked at his senses. It was an assault of decay, a testament to neglect. Quite the mess, isn't it? A familiar voice wheezed. Taishinori Yagi, looking even more skeletal in the pale morning light, stood beside him, leaning against a rusted-out pickup truck. This, young Midoriya, is your training ground. Izuku looked from the mountain of trash to his own scrawny frame, then back to the trash. You want me to move all this? That's exactly what I want, Toshinori confirmed, his tone leaving no room for argument. Your spirit is heroic, but your body is that of a wet noodle. My quirk, One for All, is a hurricane of pure power. If you tried to inherit it now, your limbs would blow right off your body. This beach, this Herculean task, this will be your crucible. You will forge your body into a proper vessel for the power you are to receive. He produced a thick, detailed workout and diet plan titled Aim to Pass, American Dream Plan. It was an intense, borderline insane regimen of strength training, cardio, and nutritional management, all centered around the singular goal of clearing this entire section of the beach. This will be your life for the next 10 months, Toshinori said grimly. It will be hell. You will want to quit every single day. But if you can accomplish this, your body will be ready. This was the first part of his training. The physical. The forging of the vessel. Izuku looked at the mountain of trash, at the impossible task before him, and felt a familiar flicker of doubt. Then, he looked at his hero, his mentor, and the doubt was replaced by a surge of steely determination. I'll do it, All Might, he said, his voice firm. I'll do more than you ask. The first few weeks were, as predicted, hell. His muscles screamed in protest. His lungs burned. Every morning he would drag a refrigerator a few feet and collapse, gasping for air. Every night he would fall into bed, a universe of aches, and wake up feeling like he'd been hit by a truck. But he never stopped. He followed the plan to the letter, his progress measured in inches and then feet, in single tires and then stacks of them. But the American Dream plan was only half of his training. The other half was far more subtle, and in many ways far more difficult. "Close your eyes," Toshinori commanded one afternoon, after a particularly grueling session of hauling sodden couches. They were standing in a cordoned-off alleyway where a minor villain with a rubble manipulation quirk had been apprehended that morning. Izuku, still dripping with sweat and smelling faintly of mildewed upholstery, did as he was told. The world went dark, and the hum became more pronounced. "Forget what your eyes saw," Toshinori instructed. "Forget the news reports. Just feel. Tell me what your quirk is telling you. What happened here?" Izuku focused, pushing past the general noise of the city. He tried to isolate the lingering echoes in the alley. It was difficult. His quirk, now that he was aware of it, was like a muscle he'd never known he had. Trying to control it was like trying to wiggle his ears for the first time. The sensations were vague, indistinct. "It's heavy," he said finally, concentrating on a large pile of bricks and concrete. "A dense, grinding feeling. Like rocks being crushed into dust. And it's messy. The feeling is all over the place, not focused." "Good," Toshinori praised. The villain's quirk was called Rubble Rouser. He had very poor control. He could lift debris, but not shape it. Your senses picked that up. "What else?" Izuku shifted his focus. There was another, fainter echo. "Something binding," he murmured, turning his head. "Over there, by the lamppost. It feels tight. Like a rope being pulled taut." He frowned. "No, not a rope. It's more organic. Like wood." He opened his eyes. Pro-hero Kamui Woods had been the one to apprehend the villain. The echo he was sensing was the residue of Kamui's lacquered chain prison ultimate move. "Excellent, my boy!" Toshinori beamed, transforming momentarily into his muscle form for a booming laugh before deflating with a cough. "You're a natural!" This became their routine. Alongside the brutal physical regimen, they would visit the sites of recent hero-villain altercations. All Might, using his connections, got them access to scenes that were still fresh, the quirk echoes still potent. Izuku would stand, eyes closed, and act as a sensory detective. He learned to differentiate the sharp, metallic tang of a metal manipulation quirk from the smooth, cool hum of an ice quirk. He learned that fire quirks weren't all the same. Endeavors, which he sensed from a battle site half a city away, was an oppressive, all-consuming inferno, while a minor hero's fireballs felt like quick, hot pops of energy. He learned that transformation quirks left behind a strange, unsettling feeling of flux, as if the very air was still trying to remember its proper shape. His hero notebooks took on a new, secret dimension. He started a new volume, number 14. Alongside his usual meticulous drawings and tactical analyses, he added a new section for each hero. Sensory signature, Kamui Woods Quirk Arbor. Signature, feels like old, strong wood groaning and stretching under immense pressure. His ultimate moves have a tighter, more woven texture. MT Lady, Quirk Gigantification. Signature, a sudden, immense gravitational pull. The air feels dense and heavy, making it hard to breathe. The echo fades quickly once she shrinks. Eraserhead, Quirk Erasure. Signature, the most unique I've ever felt. It's not a presence, it's an absence. A sudden, terrifying silence where a quirk's hum should be. It's deeply unsettling, like a sensory black hole. His quirk was becoming more than a passive sense. It was becoming a tool for active analysis. He could feel the efficiency of a quirk, the raw power behind it, the level of control the user possessed. He could feel the frantic, chaotic energy of a villain fighting for their life versus the calm, focused energy of a pro-hero doing their job. He was learning the language of quirks. As the months wore on, his body and his quirk transformed in parallel. The scrawny, slump-shouldered boy was replaced by a lean, wiry youth. His arms, once thin as twigs, were now corded with muscle from hauling scrap metal. His back and legs were solid, powerful from pulling trucks and lifting refrigerators. He stood taller, his posture no longer a question mark but an exclamation point. The beach, once an insurmountable mountain of trash, was slowly but surely being cleared. Clean sand began to emerge, a testament to his relentless effort. His control over quirk echo grew sharper, more refined. He could now stand on a street corner, close his eyes, and pick out individual quirk signatures from the passing crowd. He could feel the low thrum of a businessman's minor lie detection quirk, the bubbly, effervescent feeling of a schoolgirl's carbonation quirk, the faint, warm glow from a man whose quirk simply let him keep his coffee perpetually warm. The world had become an infinitely more detailed, more vibrant place. Finally, the day arrived. The sun rose on the 10th month, casting its pale, humming light on a pristine, beautiful shoreline. The last piece of trash, a rusted, dented filing cabinet, sat alone on the sand. Izuku, shirtless and gleaming with sweat, his body a road map of new muscle, stood before it. The beach behind him was spotless, the waves gently lapping at the shore where mountains of junk had once stood. Toshinori was there, phone in hand, recording the moment. He was in his muscle form, a rare sight these days, his smile as wide and bright as the sunrise. With a final, triumphant roar that echoed across the clean beach, Izuku lifted the cabinet over his head and heaved it onto the truck bed. He climbed to the top of the truck, silhouetted against the rising sun, and let out a primal scream of victory. He had done it. He had moved a mountain. Toshinori's smile faltered, replaced by a look of profound pride and emotion. He deflated, wiping a tear from his eye. Oh my goodness! He wheezed. He showed Izuku the picture he'd taken 10 months ago, a scrawny, crying boy, barely able to lift a tire. Then he showed him the video he'd just taken, a strong, triumphant young man on top of a mountain of his own making. The transformation was staggering. You did it, young Midoriya, Toshinori said, his voice thick with emotion. You've worked harder than anyone I've ever known. Your vessel is ready. He plucked a single hair from his golden bangs. No, he said, his expression turning solemn as he held it out to the boy. For the final step, Izuku stared at the hair. Ha! You have to eat this! Izuku stood on the edge of the clean sand, the salty breeze cool on his skin. He had, after a moment of profound confusion and disgust, consumed the hair. He waited for a thunderclap, a flash of light, some grand sign that the power of generations had been passed to him. Nothing. He felt exactly the same. It'll take a few hours for your body to process it, Toshinori explained. Don't worry. The transfer was successful. Now get home, clean up. The UA entrance exam is in 3 hours. The exam. It was finally here. All the work, all the pain, all the training, had led to this. He felt a nervous tremor run through him, but it was different from the anxiety of the past. It was the nervous energy of an athlete before a big game, not the hopeless dread of a lamb being led to slaughter. When he finally felt it, he was halfway through his shower. It started as a low hum, deep in his bones. Not his own quirk, but something else. Something ancient and powerful. The hum grew, swelling into a vibration that made his teeth chatter. Then, the symphony returned. But this time, it wasn't coming from an external source. It was coming from inside him. He stumbled out of the shower, gripping the sink for support as the sensory overload crashed over him. One for All was a living thing inside him now, a star igniting in the core of his being. The blazing, golden power of All Might was the dominant force, a roaring sun that filled every cell. But beneath it, the other melodies were clearer than ever before. He felt a light, airy sensation, a feeling of near weightlessness that tickled his insides. Float. He felt a sharp, binding tension, like black, ethereal whips coiling in his gut. Black whip? He felt a dangerous, kinetic crackle, a feeling of stored energy building to a critical point. Gene. He felt a swirling vortex of vapor, a sense of obfuscation and misdirection. Smokescreen. He felt a primal, instinctual prickling at the back of his neck, a hyper-awareness of impending threats. Danger sense. He could feel them all, distinct but intertwined, a choir of ghosts singing within his very soul. It was overwhelming. The sheer, raw power of it all was terrifying. His newly forged body felt like a paper cup trying to contain the ocean. He collapsed to his knees on the bath mat, his head spinning, the power thrumming through him. He was going to fail. This power was too much, too big. How could he possibly control this? Then, amidst the roaring chorus, he felt it. His own quirk. The quietest sound. His quirk echo wasn't just observing the symphony from the outside anymore. It was part of it. A tiny, resonating hum, weaving itself through the immense power of One for All, touching each of the vestige quirks, feeling their shape, their texture, their very nature. It was the key. All Might was right. His quirk was the one thing that could help him make sense of this beautiful, terrifying chaos. He took a deep breath, focusing on that small, familiar sensation. He used it as an anchor, a focal point in the storm. The overwhelming cacophony began to resolve, the individual melodies becoming less jarring. He could feel the raw power of All Might's core, and he could feel the other quirks orbiting it like planets. He couldn't control them, not yet, but for the first time, he could comprehend them. He got to his feet, shaky but resolute. He had a lot to learn. But he wasn't starting from scratch. The UA auditorium was packed. Izuku sat amongst hundreds of other hopefuls, listening to Present Mike explain the practical exam. The sheer concentration of quirks in one place was a sensory bombardment. It was a constant, buzzing, humming roar of 1,000 different energies. 10 months ago, it would have been an indecipherable wall of noise. Now, he could pick out individual threads. He could feel the nervous, crackling energy of the explosive blonde boy from his middle school, Kaken. He could feel a deep, cold spot from a boy with bicolored hair sitting silently in the front. He felt a strange, no-gravity sensation from a kind-faced girl with brown hair sitting nearby. When they were released into the sprawling cityscape of the exam site, Izuku put his dual training to the test. The starting buzzer blared, and everyone else shot out of the gates. Izuku paused for a split second, closing his eyes. He didn't need to see. He could feel it. The robots, the exam targets, had their own distinct energy signature. A cold, mechanical, electric hum. He could sense where they were being activated, which sectors were seeing the most action. He could also feel the energy signatures of the other contestants, a chaotic map of power flaring all over the city. Instead of running blindly towards the action, he took a side alley. He could feel a one-pointer robot activating just around the corner. He burst out, surprising it. Now came the hard part. He focused inward, trying to grasp the immense power of One for All. He tried to draw just a tiny fraction of it, a single drop from the ocean, and channel it into his fist. He failed. The power surged, a tidal wave instead of a drop. Green lightning, an energy he now recognized as the raw, untamed runoff of OFA, crackled up his arm. He punched. The robot was obliterated, torn apart by a force it was never meant to withstand. The shockwave shattered windows down the street. And a searing, agonizing pain shot up his arm. It was broken, purple and mangled, but it was only his arm. Not his entire body. The training had worked. His body was a vessel, albeit a fragile one. He staggered back, clutching his ruined limb, pain lancing through him. This was bad. He'd scored 1 point and crippled himself. He needed a different approach. He couldn't control the output, not yet, so he had to be smarter. He started running, using his quirk echo as a guide. He ignored the big fights. He didn't need to see or hear them. He could feel the flare of quirks and the destruction of robots. He used his quirk to navigate the city like a sonar, finding the isolated, stray robots that others had missed. He couldn't fight, not with his fists. But he could outthink them. He lured a 2-pointer into a narrow passage and used debris to trip it, causing it to crash into a wall and short-circuit. He used his knowledge of the city layout and the robot locations to herd a group of 1-pointers towards another contestant, the girl with the no-gravity hum, who promptly tapped them and sent them floating helplessly into the air. He wasn't scoring points, but he was surviving and thinking. Time was running out. He had 1 point. One measly point. Despair began to set in. Then the ground shook. A shadow fell over the entire city block. The 0-pointer. It was colossal, a skyscraper-sized robot that dwarfed the surrounding buildings. Its sensory signature was terrifying, a massive, humming void of mechanical energy. Everyone ran. It was the sensible thing to do. It was worth 0 points. It was just an obstacle. Izuku turned to run with them, but a cry stopped him. The kind-faced girl with the brown hair was trapped under a piece of fallen debris, directly in the path of the advancing behemoth. The world went silent. The roaring hum of the 0-pointer, the frantic energy of the fleeing students, his own throbbing pain, it all faded away. All he could hear was the echo of All Might's voice in his head. Your body moved before you had a chance to think. He was moving. He sprinted towards the girl, towards the giant robot, his good leg pumping, his broken arm held tight against his chest. This time was different. This wasn't a blind, desperate charge. 10 months of training, both kinds, converged in this single, critical moment. He channeled one for all, not into his broken arm, but into his legs. The green lightning crackled around them, and with a single, explosive push, he launched himself into the air. He soared, a green blur rocketing towards the 0-pointer's face, hundreds of feet above the ground. As he flew, he did something new. He used his quirk echo, not on the world around him, but inward on the power he was about to unleash. He focused on the feeling of one for all coalescing in his one good arm. He could feel the immense, chaotic pressure building. He couldn't stop it, he couldn't refine it, but for a split second, he could shape it. He felt the energy gathering, and he guided it, not with physical control, but with pure sensory intent, focusing it all toward a single point in his fist. He was trying to give the hurricane a direction. He drew back his arm. The sleeve of his tracksuit shredded under the strain. Smash! He screamed, the word torn from his throat. His fist connected with the robot's head. The result was annihilation. The robot's head imploded, a catastrophic failure of metal and wiring. The shockwave from the punch was a visible dome of force that rippled outwards, buckling the robot's frame and shattering every window for 3 blocks. The colossal machine froze, its lights flickered, and then it began to topple backwards, away from the girl. The recoil, however, was just as devastating. He felt the bones in his arm shatter, the ligaments tear. The pain was absolute. His legs, which had gotten him into the air, were just as mangled, broken by the same backlash. He was a broken puppet, plummeting from the sky. This is it, he thought, the world spinning. I saved her. But I'm going to die. A sharp slap on his cheek. The terrifying sensation of falling was replaced by a strange, buoyant feeling of weightlessness. The girl, who had freed herself, had slapped him, activating her quirk. His fall slowed to a gentle drift. She then threw up, a rainbow arcing through the air, just as the final buzzer sounded. Izuku lay on the shattered pavement, his body a ruin, his senses overloaded by the echo of his own massive power output. He had 0 rescue points showing on any official scoreboard. He had 1 villain point, but he had saved someone. He had been a hero. As unconsciousness claimed him, the last thing he felt was a warm, gentle, mending presence washing over him. The hum of Recovery Girl, and for the first time, the quietest sound in the world was the most welcome thing he had ever felt. Waking up was a disorienting experience. For a moment, Izuku was adrift in a sea of pure sensation, his consciousness untethered from his body. The first thing he registered was the hum. It was a gentle, rhythmic, and incredibly soothing presence, the feeling of a freshly laundered blanket being draped over his soul. It was the signature of Recovery Girl's quirk, a constant, low-level mending that was knitting his shattered body back together. He opened his eyes. The ceiling was a sterile white. He was in the UA infirmary, the same room where his world had been rewritten. He tried to sit up and a dull ache resonated through his limbs. Don't push it, dearie, a familiar voice chirped. Recovery Girl was sitting at her desk, sipping tea. You gave me quite the workout. 3 broken limbs and a dozen fractures. One for all is a ridiculously selfish quirk, isn't it? Always taking a toll on its host. She spoke of the most powerful quirk in existence with the casual annoyance of a mechanic complaining about a finicky engine. Izuku stared at his arms and legs. They were whole. A little sore, but whole. I healed? He croaked, his throat dry. Mostly, she confirmed. My quirk accelerates your body's own healing process. It uses up your stamina, so you'll be exhausted for a while. But yes, you're in one piece. She fixed him with a stern glare. A piece I expect you to keep that way. If you continue to use that power like a self-destruct button, I won't keep healing you. You'll have to learn control, boy. True strength isn't about how hard you can punch, it's about how you can use your power without destroying yourself in the process. Her words were a stark reminder. He had the power. Now came the impossible task of mastering it. A week later, he received his acceptance letter from Yue. It came in the form of a small holographic projector. All Might, in all his golden glory, appeared on his desk, congratulating him. He hadn't scored high on villain points, just the one, but the exam had a hidden component. Rescue points. For his selfless act of saving the girl, he'd been awarded 60, the highest score in the exam. He'd done it. He was going to UA. The first day was a whirlwind of nerves and excitement. Finding his classroom, 1A, was an adventure in itself. The door was absurdly large. He hesitated outside, the sensory hum of the classroom a daunting mix of unfamiliar signatures. He could feel the crackling, explosive energy of Kaken, a familiar and intimidating presence. He could feel the cool, steady thrum of the engine-legged boy from the exam orientation. And he felt the light, bubbly, zero-gravity sensation of the girl he'd saved. Taking a deep breath, he slid the door open. The chaos of the classroom immediately subsided as all eyes turned to him. The engine-legged boy, Tenya Ida, marched over, chopping his hands through the air with rigid precision. He apologized for his behavior at the orientation, praising Izuku for discerning the true nature of the exam. Then the girl, Achiko Uraraka, bounced over, her energy as light and cheerful as her quirk's signature. She gushed about his incredible punch, and how she'd begged the examiners to give him some of her points. Izuku, overwhelmed by the positive attention, could only stammer and blush, his brain short-circuiting. If you're just here to make friends, then you can pack up your things and leave, the voice came from the floor. It was a dry, tired monotone that cut through the cheerful chatter like a knife. Lying on the floor behind Uraraka was a yellow sleeping bag, and from its opening, a single, bloodshot eye stared out at them. The man inside, Shota Aizawa, looked like he hadn't slept in a week. The sensory signature that emanated from him was nothing. Izuku had catalogued it before, from a distance. The feeling of erasure. But up close, it was profoundly different. It wasn't a quirk that projected energy. It was one that consumed it. It was a void. A patch of absolute sensory silence in the noisy room. When Aizawa's gaze swept over the class, the ambient hum of their latent quirks seemed to dim, to curdle, as if shying away from his presence. Their new homeroom teacher unzipped himself from his sleeping bag, chugged a juice pouch, and ordered them to change into their gym uniforms and meet him on the field. There was no opening ceremony, no orientation. Their Yui experience was beginning immediately. On the field, Aizawa explained his intention, a quirk apprehension test. 8 physical fitness tests where they were allowed to use their quirks. To raise the stakes, he declared that the student who ranked last would be deemed to have no potential and would be expelled. The classroom erupted in protest. Izuku's heart hammered in his chest. Expelled? On the first day, his quirk echo was going haywire. The sudden surge of fear, surprise, and determination from his 19 classmates created a chaotic storm of sensory information. He could feel Uraraka's bubbly quirk field turn sharp with anxiety. He could feel Ida's orderly engine hum rev with righteous indignation. He could feel Bakugo's explosive crackle intensify with arrogant confidence. And through it all, there was Aizawa, a pool of calm, tired silence at the center of the storm. The first test was a 50-meter dash. Izuku watched as his classmates showcased their abilities. Ida used his engines to clear the distance in just over 3 seconds. Uraraka made her clothes and shoes weightless to run faster. A boy with a tail used it to propel himself forward. Bakugo used his explosions like jet propulsion. Izuku knew he couldn't use one for all. Even a tiny percentage would shatter his legs. He ran it normally, his time painfully average. He was already falling behind. The grip strength test, the standing long jump, the repeated side steps, it was the same story. His scores were mediocre, barely above a quirkless middle schooler's. He could feel the pitying glances from some of his classmates, and the contemptuous sneer from Kaken. He was falling to the bottom of the pack, the threat of expulsion looming over him like an executioner's axe. Then came the final test, the ball throw. Uraraka went first. She touched the ball, activated her quirk, and threw. The ball sailed up, and up, and up, never coming down. The device in Aizawa's hand beeped. Infinity. A wave of awe went through the class. Izuku felt it too, but he also felt the sheer, elegant simplicity of her quirk's signature, a perfect negation of a fundamental force. This was his last chance. The other tests had been about speed or agility. This was about a single, explosive burst of power. He had to use one for all. He had to prove he belonged here. He walked up to the circle, the soft ball feeling heavy in his hand. He could feel Aizawa's tired, calculating gaze on him. He took a deep breath, trying to remember his training. He focused inward, reaching for the sea of power within him. He tried to draw just a little, to pour it into his arm for one, single, magnificent throw. He drew his arm back, the green lightning of one for all beginning to crackle around it. This would hurt. It would break his arm again, but it would be worth it to show them, to show Aizawa, that he had potential. He swung his arm forward, pouring all his hope and desperation into the throw, and then it was gone. The power vanished. The green lightning sputtered and died. The immense, roaring symphony of one for all inside him was abruptly silenced, muted as if someone had thrown a thick, lead blanket over it. The connection was severed. He threw the ball with his own, normal strength. It landed with a pathetic thud a mere 46 meters away. Izuku stared at his arm in shock. What had happened? I erased your quirk. Aizawa's voice was a low growl. Izuku spun around. The teacher's hair was floating, his eyes glowing a menacing red. The yellow goggles were gone, revealing the full intensity of his gaze. The long, gray bandages around his neck were writhing like snakes. The feeling of it was the most terrifying sensory experience Izuku had ever had. It was a targeted, focused version of the void he'd felt before. The silence wasn't just around Aizawa anymore. It was inside Izuku. The place where One for All had been roaring just a second ago was now a silent, empty vacuum. It felt like a fundamental part of him had been surgically removed. It was a feeling of profound loss, of being rendered utterly, completely powerless. He didn't just look confused, like the other students who had seen this quirk for the first time. He looked like he had lost the sense, like a man who had suddenly gone deaf and blind. That ridiculous entrance exam is completely irrational, Aizawa said, his voice dripping with disdain. A person with a self-destructive quirk like yours has no place here. You can't save anyone if you're just going to incapacitate yourself. You'd be a liability, forcing someone else to save you. His hair fell, his eyes returned to normal, and the connection to One for All slammed back into place. The symphony returned with a painful rush, like blood returning to a numb limb. The sudden transition from absolute silence to roaring power made Izuku stagger. Aizawa took a step closer, his expression severe. You have one more throw. Don't make me waste my time again. He walked back to his spot, leaving Izuku alone in the circle, his mind reeling. Aizawa was right. He couldn't be a one-trick pony. He couldn't be a hero who broke himself with every move. He needed to find another way. He needed control. He looked at the ball, then at his hand. He didn't have the fine motor skills to channel a small percentage into his whole arm. He tried and failed. But what if he didn't use his whole arm? What if he focused it all, the entire destructive force, on a single point? One fingertip. He took a deep breath. He closed his eyes, ignoring the stares of his classmates. He used his quirk echo, not to sense others, but to sense himself. He felt the vast ocean of One for All churning inside him. He remembered the feeling from the zero-pointer fight, of trying to shape the power with his senses, to give the hurricane a direction. He drew back his arm, but this time he didn't let the power flood the entire limb. He visualized it. He felt it, a raging river of energy, and he was building a dam, trying to force it all through one tiny, single floodgate at the very tip of his index finger. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done. The power fought him, wanting to surge everywhere at once. Green lightning crackled violently, not just around his arm, but over his entire body. Veins bulged on his forehead. "This is it," he gritted out, feeling the pressure build to an impossible level. He swung his arm forward, and at the last possible second, he opened the floodgate. The power of One for All, the legacy of 8 heroes, erupted from the tip of his finger. The sound was a deafening crack, like a rifle shot next to his ear. The force of the release created a massive shockwave that tore up the ground in front of him. The ball became a white comet, screaming through the air, leaving a sonic boom in its wake. It flew farther than Bakugo's, farther than anyone's, a tiny speck disappearing into the sky. The cost was immediate and excruciating. A bolt of pure agony shot up his arm. His index finger was broken, swollen, and purple, the color of a dying nebula. But it was only his finger. His arm was fine. His legs were fine. He was still standing. He was still in the fight. He turned to Aizawa, a triumphant, pain-filled grin on his face. "Mr. Aizawa, I can still move." Aizawa watched the ball's trajectory, his device beeping. 705.3 meters. He looked back at Izuku, at the boy's mangled finger and his defiant expression. A slow, feral grin spread across the teacher's face. It was a terrifying sight. "This kid," Aizawa murmured to himself. "He's interesting." Izuku stumbled through the rest of the day, his finger throbbing in a makeshift sling Recovery Girl had given him. He had placed last in the final rankings, but Aizawa revealed the expulsion was just a rational deception, to get them to perform at their best. As the students were packing up to leave, Aizawa's voice cut through the chatter. "Midoriya!" A word. Izuku's blood ran cold. He approached his teacher's desk, his heart pounding. Aizawa leaned back in his chair, his tired eyes scrutinizing Izuku with an unnerving intensity. "When I erased your quirk," he began, his tone flat and analytical, "your reaction was abnormal." Izuku flinched. What do you mean?" "Other students, when I use erasure on them for the first time, they get confused. They think their quirk malfunctioned. They try again, and it takes them a moment to realize I'm the cause." You reacted instantly? You looked like you'd been unplugged from the world. You looked like you lost a limb." "Explain." Izuku's mind raced. He couldn't tell him about One for All. But his own quirk. All Might had registered him at UA under his guidance, and his file had been updated with Recovery Girl's diagnosis. Aizawa, as his homeroom teacher, would have access to it. It was better to be honest. I have a sensory quirk, sir," Izuku mumbled, looking at the floor. "It's called quirk echo. I can feel other people's quirks. The energy they give off. When you used your quirk on me, it wasn't just that my other quirk didn't work. It felt like you turned off the sound. It was completely silent inside me. It was a shock." Aizawa's expression didn't change, but Izuku could feel a subtle shift in his teacher's silent aura. It wasn't a quirk-related feeling, but a human one. A flicker of intense interest. "Quirk echo," Aizawa repeated, tasting the words. "A passive, sensory quirk that perceives quirk factors, and you're using it in tandem with a ridiculously overpowered stockpiling quirk that your body can't handle. You're a walking contradiction, Midoriya." He stood up, towering over Izuku. "That stunt with your finger was clever. A desperate, last-ditch effort. But desperation isn't a strategy. You can't keep breaking yourself, piece by piece. You think you can become a hero like that? And no, sir," Izuku stammered. "You have two very different, very unique tools at your disposal." Aizawa continued, his voice low and serious. "One is a sledgehammer that shatters every time you swing it. The other is a scalpel, a tool for fine analysis. A real hero, a smart hero, would learn how to use the scalpel to guide the sledgehammer." He leaned in closer. "Your sensory quirk is wasted if all you do is use it to observe. It has potential beyond that. Potential for tracking. For prediction. For rescue. It's the kind of quirk that excels in the dark, where sight is useless. It's an underground hero's dream tool." Izuku's eyes widened. An underground hero. Like Aizawa himself. "I'm not All Might," Aizawa said bluntly, as if reading his mind. I can't teach you how to throw a punch that can change the weather. That's not my field. But your other quirk, your quirk echo, that is something I can work with. I can teach you how to hone it. How to filter the noise, how to focus, how to use it for stealth, for analysis, for control. I can teach you how to be more than just a cheap imitation of the number one. He straightened up, his expression returning to its usual tired mask. Report to Gym Gamma after school every Tuesday and Thursday. Don't be late. We're going to turn that whisper of a quirk into something useful. Now get to the infirmary and have recovery girl fix that finger properly. He turned and walked away, his bandages trailing behind him like an afterthought. Izuku stood frozen by the desk, his mind reeling. He had survived his first day. He hadn't been expelled. And he had gained something he never, ever expected, a second mentor. All Might was teaching him how to be a symbol, a beacon of hope. But Shota Aizawa, the cynical, exhausted, and terrifyingly perceptive Eraserhead, was going to teach him how to be a hero. He was going to teach him how to weaponize the silence. The next day, hero basic training began. The booming, flamboyant entrance of All Might, clad in his silver-aged costume, sent a jolt of excitement through the classroom. For everyone else, it was the thrill of being taught by the number one hero. For Izuku, it was a complex mix of that same thrill, layered with the quiet intimacy of their shared secret and the daunting weight of his inheritance. All Might announced their first exercise, the battle trial. An indoor, 2-on-2 mock battle, heroes versus villains. They were to draw lots to determine the teams and matchups. Izuku felt a cold knot of dread form in his stomach. He was still a novice. His control over One for All was laughably poor, measured in the number of broken bones per use. As he drew his lot, Team A, he saw Katsuki Bakugo draw his, Team D. Their eyes met across the room. Bakugo's crimson gaze was a laser beam of pure, unadulterated fury. The explosive crackle of his quirk signature, usually a steady, aggressive staccato, was now a frantic, enraged roar that grated on Izuku's senses. He knew, with absolute certainty, who their opponents would be. His partner was Ochiko Uraraka, Team A. Their opponents, as he predicted, were Team D, Katsuki Bakugo and Tenya Ida. The moment the matchup was announced, a palpable tension filled the observation room. Everyone in the class knew the history between the explosive prodigy and the boy who had, until recently, been quirkless. All Might pulled him aside for a moment, while the others prepared. Young Midoriya, he said, his voice a low rumble beneath the usual bombast. This is not just a test of strength. It is a test of character. I know the history between you and young Bakugo is complicated. Do not let it consume you. You are a hero now. Think like one. Izuku nodded, his mouth dry. Think like a hero. As they walked towards the designated building, Uraraka was a bundle of nervous energy. Wow, going up against Bakugo and Ida, this is gonna be tough. Ida's so fast, and Bakugo is, well, he's Bakugo. She looked at Izuku, her big, brown eyes full of concern. Are you okay, Deku? You seem really tense. I'm fine. Izuku lied, though his heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The proximity to Bakugo was a sensory nightmare. Kaken's rage wasn't just an emotion. It was a palpable force, a scorching heat that warped the air around him. The hum of his quirk was a constant, deafening cacophony of explosions waiting to happen, a sound like 1,000 firecrackers being lit at once. It was so loud, so aggressive, that it made it hard for Izuku to focus on anything else, a form of sensory static that threatened to overwhelm his quirk echo. What's the plan? Uraraka asked, her trust in him absolute after the entrance exam. Izuku forced himself to push past the noise. He unfurled the blueprints of the building. Kaken is emotional. He'll come straight for me, ignoring the objective. Ida is the opposite. He's logical and will stick to the mission. He'll stay with the weapon. So it's likely they'll split up. Kaken will hunt me, and Ida will guard the bomb. This was the analysis he would have given 10 months ago. But now, he had another tool. Uraraka, your quirk is perfect for a mission like this. He continued, trying to channel the calm, analytical mindset Aizawa was trying to drill into him. You can make us lighter to move quietly, or you can use it to retrieve the weapon itself. The plan is for you to find the bomb while I keep Kaken busy. Keep him busy? Uraraka squeaked. He'll pulverize you, that's the idea, Izuku said, a grim determination settling over him. I just need to buy you some time. The buzzer sounded, signaling the start of the trial. They slipped into the building, Uraraka tapping their shoes to make their footsteps silent. The interior of the building was a labyrinth of concrete hallways and blind corners. The sensory noise of Bakugo's rage was everywhere, echoing off the walls, making it impossible to pinpoint his location through that alone. It was like trying to find a specific person in a stadium full of screaming fans. They rounded a corner, and he was there. Bakugo didn't waste time with words. He lunged, his right hand already sparking. It was an ambush, a perfectly executed blindside attack. But Izuku wasn't blindsided. In the split second before Bakugo's hand shot forward, Izuku felt it. A sharp, localized intensification of Bakugo's quirk signature. It was a sensation like gasoline fumes suddenly igniting, a buildup of heat and pressure in his right palm. It was the tell. The sensory precursor to an explosion. Izuku reacted on pure instinct, a product of Aizawa's fledgling training. He threw himself and Uraraka to the side. An immense explosion ripped through the space they had occupied just a moment before, scorching the wall and filling the hallway with smoke and the acrid smell of burnt nitroglycerin. Come on, Deku! Bakugo roared from the smoke, his voice a guttural snarl. Don't you dare dodge! Stand and fight me! Izuku's ears were ringing. Uraraka, go! Find the bomb! He yelled, pushing her down a connecting corridor. She hesitated. But Deku! Go! She ran. Now, it was just the two of them. Duet of explosions. Bakugo emerged from the smoke, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. So you did have a quirk all along, you damn liar! You've been looking down on me this whole time, haven't you? Laughing at me behind my back. No, Kaken, you've got it all wrong! Izuku pleaded, backing away down the hall. His mind was a whirlwind. He had to explain. But how could he, without revealing the secret of One for All? Shut up! Bakugo screamed, blasting forward, using smaller, controlled explosions to propel himself like a rocket. Izuku's quirk echo was working overtime. The sensory overload from Bakugo's rage was still a problem, but by focusing, by treating it as background noise, he could pick out the specifics. He could feel the slight shift in temperature in Bakugo's palms, the subtle gathering of energy that preceded each blast. It was like seeing lightning a fraction of a second before hearing the thunder. It gave him an infinitesimal edge, just enough time to duck, to weave, to throw himself out of the way of the explosive barrage. He dodged another blast, the heat searing the sleeve of his costume. Bakugo was relentless, a force of nature. His movements were fluid, powerful, honed by years of using his quirk as an extension of his own body. Izuku, by contrast, was clumsy, his power a foreign entity he was struggling to contain. His only advantage was the secret sense, this early warning system. Suddenly, Bakugo changed tactics. He flew past Izuku, then blasted the wall behind him, cutting off his retreat. He was cornered. I'm an amazing genius, Deku! Bakugo snarled, stalking towards him, his palms smoking. That's why I'm gonna beat you. Even with your fancy new quirk. He lashed out with a powerful right hook, no explosion this time. It was a feint. Izuku felt it. The energy in his right hand was a decoy, a low-level spark. The real threat, the massive build-up of power, was in his left hand, which he was bringing up for a devastating uppercut. Izuku's body moved before his brain could process the strategy. He dropped, the explosive uppercut grazing his mask, and swept Bakugo's legs out from under him. Bakugo hit the ground with a surprised grunt. It was a clumsy move, something he'd seen in an old hero movie, but it worked. He didn't press the attack. He used the opening to run. He couldn't win in a direct fight. Not yet. He just had to survive. He sprinted through the maze of corridors, Bakugo hot on his heels, his explosions shaking the building. Get back here, DKU! In the observation room, the other students were stunned. Whoa, Midori is holding his own against Bakugo! Kirishima exclaimed. He's so manly! He is not holding his own! A quiet voice corrected. It was Shoto Todoroki, the boy with the bicolored hair. He is merely surviving. Bakugo is toying with him. But Midoriya's reaction time is unnatural. He seems to know where Bakugo will strike before he does. All Might watched the monitor, his fists clenched. He's using it. Young Aizawa's training. He's using his sensory quirk to predict Bakugo's attacks. He's not fighting like me. He's fighting like himself. Izuku ducked into a side room, panting, his body already bruised and battered. He pressed the small radio in his ear. Uraraka status? I found it! Her voice crackled back. 5th floor, central room. But Ida's here. He's cleared the entire room of everything. There's nothing for me to use my quirk on, and he's too fast to get close to. He's playing the part of a villain really well. Izuku looked up at the ceiling. 5th floor. He was on the 3rd. He had to end this. He had to get to her. A massive explosion blew the door off its hinges. Bakugo stood in the frame, his breathing heavy, a maniacal grin on his face. He lifted his gauntlet, the one shaped like a grenade. You know what these are for, Deku? He asked, his voice dangerously calm. My quirk secretes nitroglycerin like sweat. These gauntlets store it up. The school warned me not to use it on a person, but who cares? He aimed the gauntlet at Izuku. In the observation room, All Might's voice boomed over the intercom. Young Bakugo, stop! Are you trying to kill him? He won't die if he dodges! Bakugo screamed back, and pulled the pin. The sensory flare from the gauntlet was blinding. It wasn't a pop or a crackle. It was a sun going nova. A colossal, focused beam of destructive energy. The entire building shook as the explosion tore through the room, blasting a hole through the outer wall. When the smoke cleared, Izuku was alive, huddled in a crater of his own making, his costume shredded, his body scorched. He had barely managed to dive out of the main blast radius. The sheer concussive force had done enough damage. His ears were ringing, and his vision was blurry. He knew he couldn't dodge the next one. This was it. He had to fight back. He had to use one for all. He staggered to his feet, facing Bakugo across the ruined room. Why won't you use it? Bakugo demanded, his voice trembling with a rage that bordered on hysteria. Are you looking down on me that much? Is your quirk so amazing that you don't even need to use it to beat me? That's not it, Kaken. Izuku gasped, raising his fists. It's because you're amazing that I have to do whatever it takes to beat you, he charged. Bakugo met him halfway, his right hand raised for another massive explosion. This was the moment. The culmination of everything. His rivalry with Kaken, his new power, his new sense. He had one shot. He channeled one for all into his right arm. The green lightning flared to life, the sleeve of his costume disintegrating. This was the sledgehammer. But he wasn't aiming at Bakugo. He used his quirk echo, not on his opponent, but on his environment. He felt the structure of the building around them. The load-bearing pillars, the reinforced concrete of the floors. He felt Uraraka and Ida, 2 floors directly above them. He could feel the exact spot on the ceiling that corresponded to the floor right in front of the weapon. This was the scalpel. Bakugo swung. His explosion was a wide, sweeping arc, designed to be impossible to dodge. Izuku didn't try to dodge. He swung his own arm upwards, towards the ceiling. He didn't focus the power into his fingertip this time. He let it flood his entire arm, a full power, body-breaking smash. But it was a controlled, calculated release, aimed with the precision his quirk afforded him. The scalpel was guiding the sledgehammer. Detroit smash! He roared. The punch wasn't a punch. It was an uppercut that never connected with a person. It connected with the air, with the building itself. A colossal, focused pillar of wind pressure shot upwards, directly at the spot he had targeted. On the 5th floor, Ida was monologuing about his flawless villain strategy when the floor beneath him exploded. A hurricane erupted from below, shattering the concrete. The shockwave ripped through the room, sending a tidal wave of debris flying. This was Uraraka's chance. Improvised special move! She yelled, grabbing a pillar that had been ripped from the floor. Comet home run! She swung the massive chunk of concrete like a baseball bat, sending the smaller pieces of debris flying at Ida like a shotgun blast. While he was distracted, trying to dodge the barrage, she leaped over him, hugged the papier-mâché bomb, and screamed. "I've retrieved it!" Down on the third floor, the aftermath of the two attacks was devastating. Bakugo's explosion had scorched the left side of Izuku's body, his mask blown away. Izuku's right arm was a mangled, purple ruin, broken and useless. Smoke and dust filled the air. Bakugo stood in stunned silence, his eyes wide with disbelief. He hadn't been hit. He hadn't been touched. But he had been utterly, completely defeated. Deku hadn't tried to beat him. He had tried to beat the mission. He had used Bakugo's own attack as a diversion for a larger strategy. He had fought like a hero. The hero team. Why-ins! All Might's voice declared over the speaker system, breaking the stunned silence. Bakugo looked at his own smoking hands, then at Izuku, who was slumping against the wall, clutching his broken arm, his face a mask of pain but his eyes clear and resolute. In that moment, Bakugo didn't just see the useless, quirkless Deku he had tormented for years. He saw a rival. The duet was over. And a new, far more complex song had just begun.